Come on in and spend some time with the film hobbyist. My name is Lydia, and I love movies. We're here in my attic room. You're sitting on a forest green Walmart futon with a black metal frame. I'm sitting in an old desk chair with cracks in the pleather lining. The floor beneath us is hardwood with worn patches where feet have frequently paced over the last 50 years. In between us is a round, faded blue braided rug. It's a wonderful place to sit and lay out the pieces of what I'm working on. Skeins of yarn in a rainbow arc, or books and pages of research for my novel. It's been over a year since you first came to visit me, and to honor the occasion, I thought I'd discuss with you one of my favorite films, 1994's Little Women, directed by Gillian Armstrong, starring Winona Ryder. This film is an adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's novel, or rather, novels. What we call Little Women in the U.S. is actually a collection of two works, Little Women, published in 1868, and its second volume, sometimes called Good Wives, published in 1869. You are probably familiar with this story, but if not, I'll sketch out some details. Volume 1 begins at Christmas and takes place over the course of a year, following the life of a family of 4 sisters, 16-year-old Meg, 15-year-old Jo, short for Josephine, 13-year-old Beth, 12-year-old Amy, and their mother Marmee, while their father is off serving as a chaplain in the Union Army during the Civil War. Each character has distinct interests and personalities and faces many challenges that help them grow and mature. They also become close with the wealthy neighbor boy, Laurie, his elderly grandfather, Mr. Lawrence, and his tutor, Mr. Brooke. Tomboyish Jo and Laurie are especially good friends, and Mr. Brooke has a romantic interest in Meg. Volume 2 takes place 3 years later and picks up with the characters' forays into marriage and adulthood, particularly Jo, as she moves to New York City to be a governess and pursue a career as a writer, becoming friends with a German professor named Friedrich Baer. Volume 2, essentially a sequel, was written very quickly after the publication and wild success of the first, and was in conversation with that success. If you've ever felt confused as to the structure of this story, its character arcs, and seeming repetition, if you've ever felt like the first half is where all the good stuff happens, except a famous death, then this might be why. I like the book. I was 12 or so when I read it for the first time, and I enjoyed it. I've reread it a couple of times since. But I love this movie. It might be tempting to lay that at the feet of nostalgia. I saw this film in theaters with my family as a preschooler, too young to be quite familiar with movie theater etiquette. In the family lore, this produced several full-voiced comments my mom still laughs hysterically over, most notably, "She got a pear in the mail?" and "Is it 1997 yet?" I was old enough that I remember that the context of that last question was the 4 years later text in between part 1 and part 2. I knew that time was progressing. I was just too young to understand the concept of history, or math, apparently. It might be tempting for you to believe that this is my favorite version of Little Women because it was my first Little Women. But the 1994 film isn't the first adaptation of the book, nor was it the last. There have been 5 separate stage plays, at least 15 TV movies, shows, and miniseries, a musical, 2 operas, 6 audio dramas, and 7 films, the first of which was produced in 1917, less than 50 years after the publication of the book. My First Little Women was an anime TV special adaptation of Volume 1 that we owned on VHS. There have been enough anime TV adaptations that I have to specify that it was not the one produced by Nippon Animation, the precursor to Studio Ghibli. This one was sort of a pilot launch to a series that didn't really have much to do with the books other than the use of its characters, though this special is actually not too bad of an adaptation of Part 1, holding on to several plot points that don't appear in the 1994 film, like the girls using their personal Christmas money to buy presents for Marmee, and Beth's having to face the possibility of scary Mr. Lawrence in order to play his piano. Though it does add a wild sequence where Joe and Laurie rescue a rather offensively drawn runaway slave from a river raft. This VHS was one of a handful that existed in my house before the 1994 movie that I know I watched regularly, to the point that I might subconsciously view it as the source material from which the 1994 film is adapted. But I will concede that my love for the 1994 film is somewhat due to childhood nostalgia. I am also one of 4 sisters, all of us of literary and artistic persuasion. 2 have degrees in visual art and pursued art-related careers. The other is a writer and editor. All of us acted in plays in high school. We all studied musical instruments, most into college. We all sang in choirs, and when we go Christmas caroling, we sing different vocal parts. We are also very different people. That mishmash of difference of personality, delighting in similar interests, is the background noise to this film specifically. In the 1994 film, the March Sisters are introduced as a unit. They come barreling down the stairs and hallways to embrace their mother, only Amy standing out because of her youth and blonde hair, but everyone works together to warm up their mother and bring her to the fire. They don't actually get introduced as individuals until the next sequence, as Marmee gives them a candle and their own personal Christmas greeting. Though, as in most of the adaptations, Joe is the clear primary protagonist, towards the beginning of this film, the girls are almost always together in some capacity, in their camaraderie and their squabbles. Greta Gerwig's 2019 adaptation expands on this, with the girls literally speaking over each other, tumbling on the floor. But Gillian Armstrong brought a warmth and an affection not seen in previous films, particularly the 1949 adaptation, where the girls don't actually seem to like each other much at all. The March Sisters are all pretty close in age. My sisters and I span 16 years. But there is something about belonging to a group, making silly radio stories together into old tape recorders, performing together, doing each other's hair, that I find captured in this film. It's become a rite of passage that men marrying into our family watch it to understand a bit of our family dynamic. There's also something pretty amazing about this distinct relationship each sister has with each other. Beth's the only one who gets along perfectly with everyone, but she bonds with each sister over different things. Meg over their domestic interests, Amy with their position as the youngest sisters, and Joe over mutual delight. Beth loves Joe's stories, and Joe loves who Beth is. This film has Joe and Beth sharing a room, which builds an extra special connection. Meg and Joe are often together as the older 2 siblings, doing big girl activities like attending balls and working grown-up jobs, sharing responsibility for the family, experiencing tension over their disparate priorities. Meg and Amy bond over their love of beautiful, fine things, their desire to be like other girls in their community. Meg famously giving hard-earned money to Amy to buy the trendiest status symbol in school, a reality that continues to be relatable today. Joe and Amy mostly don't get along. Joe sometimes finds Amy's childish expressions and desires amusing, sometimes annoying, and Amy has the jealousy of a younger sister, wishing she could do all the fun and interesting things that the big girls get to do. These dynamics are a deeply personal part of my family as well. Each of us has had things we bond over and places of tension. And I love to see those dynamics mirrored through these fictional sisters. It makes the joy they share more alive, the sorrow more painful, the disagreements more potent. There's a particular fight between Joe and Amy that I know rings far truer because of how it echoes out of personal experience, which I've lived as both girls at one time or another. Every girl of literary aspiration and dramatic temperament identifies with Jo March, but this is especially true of those who also have a big temper and tomboyish inclinations. I've never been exactly a hyper-feminine person, and spent my young girlhood exploring the desert barefoot and scrambling up any tree I could. As an imaginative person, I found far more interest in playing baby Godzillas with the boys at school than hair salon with the girls, and was never much interested in boy bands and crushes as a tween. I spent most of my first 17 years of life fending off accusations that my male friends were my boyfriends, and lived in dread of the idea of one of them ruining the friendship by saying they liked me. There's a long-held contingency of Little Women fans throughout history that hold fast to the idea that Jo and Laurie ought to have been romantically paired. Fan mail written to Louisa May Alcott in 1868 begged it to be so. Alcott invented the character of Professor Bhaer merely to spite them. He's the opposite of Laurie in nearly every way: middle-aged, discerning, steady, and poor. This film does its best to beef up Jo's relationship with Professor Bhaer. But casting young Christian Bale to play Laurie did nothing to quell the long-running ship. He and Winona Ryder have such good chemistry. They match each other's energy in such a delightful way. You absolutely believe them as the best of friends, thick as thieves. But I agree, especially in this adaptation, that they work best as family. He belongs with this group, but not romantically with Jo. All of those are unsophisticated, mere experiential reasons why I love this film. But as I grew up, I began to appreciate what this adaptation does that is distinctly different than other versions. It's no secret that Little Women was heavily inspired by Louisa May Alcott and her family. Jo is very clearly a self-insert character, and the other sisters are also clearly inspired by her real-life siblings. The four of them were very close, and like the Marches, used to put on plays for the neighborhood children. Her youngest sister, May, was an artist just like Amy, and her pencil sketches of the Greek pantheon grace the walls of her old bedroom. Little Women has continued to remain popular with the understanding that it's an exaggerated portrayal of all American girlhood. The March's social position, as once wealthy, now fallen on hard times, is nearly middle class, interacting with the wealthy but still having to worry about money. The girls hold romantic and career aspirations that wind up in largely socially acceptable places. The Alcotts, in contrast, were very, very far from normal. Most of this has to do with Louisa May Alcott's father, Bronson Alcott. It's rather telling that she kind of writes out the March patriarch as a distant, vaguely moral presence rather than a real character, because anything close to Bronson Alcott would take up too much energy from the story. He was a proponent of experimental schooling methods that moved away from rote schooling to conversational teaching out of the children's experience. He was against corporal punishment in schools, was an abolitionist, often tried to stick to a plant-based diet out of concern for animal welfare, and was the one who helped Louisa May Alcott get in touch with the editor who suggested she write a book for girls. This all makes him sound like a man before his time. He was actually much more of a mess, probably a lot closer to Viggo Mortensen's character in the film Captain Fantastic. He tried starting a utopian society at one point, like a proto-commune, based on agrarian society, but didn't actually know anything about farming. He was part of the Transcendentalist movement in Concord, Massachusetts, and wrote an important book on it that is largely incomprehensible. But you don't get a Louisa May Alcott without a Bronson Alcott, or an Abby May, on whom Marmee is based. She joined him in his educational reforms before they fell in love, and she did join him on all of his ideological forays, although when they were starving on the commune, she did threaten to leave for the sake of the children. Robin Swycord, screenwriter for the 1994 adaptation, decided to let all this historical context in. The marches are toned down from the Alcotts, but are still progressive for their time. Their father lost the family fortune when the school he was running was shut down after he admitted a black student. This is a detail from real life. Bronson Alcott did this twice and lost the schools and the money both times. Meg doesn't own a silk dress because silk mills employ child labor. The Alcotts did actually try to abstain from cotton and silk because of the textile industry's relationship to slavery. In the book, Amy leaves school out of shame and vanity. In the movie, Swycord has her withdraw because of corporal punishment, Marmee writing a scathing letter to such effect, repeating points that Bronson Alcott would have approved of. Jo explains to Professor Bear that her family grew up among transcendentalist circles, which he recognizes as coming from German philosophy, something they bond over. Jo and Meg's relationship to alcohol is discussed as her family are temperance people, just like the Alcotts, common for abolitionists and suffragettes of the day. Swycord also expands Marmee's ideals to be proto-feminist, while still era-appropriate. She gives a long rant to Mr. Brooke about how girls are just as physically active as boys, if not restrained by corsets. And while it's obvious by their silhouettes that the March Sisters are wearing corsets, they might be wearing health corsets or other similar garments championed by various points during the 19th century. Amelia Bloomer's rational dress was contemporaneous with Marmee, and she was part of suffrage and temperance circles Marmee might have encountered. It is also worth pointing out that in the book, Marmee's attitudes toward her daughters are on the progressive end of things in her context. Girls marrying for love with no thought toward economic prospect, having no plans or schemes to get her daughters married, but caring more about their character and place in the world. Her supporting of Jo as an unmarried woman, never pressuring her to marry Laurie. If there is one thing I wish Swycord had kept from the book, it would be Marmee's revelation that she is angry every day of her life, but has learned to master her temper. The idea that a proper woman could be angry and yet wise and lovely is something I miss. But instead, we get a conversation about women's suffrage. The ideas that women shouldn't vote because their husband would vote for them, or that women should vote because they are more moral than men, both which Jo refutes by pointing out that women should vote because they are humans and citizens. Historically contemporary feminism. And hey, Thank you, Robin Swycord, for doing the research to make this movie more closely aligned with late 20th century values by looking to the actual historical context rather than just shoehorning in modern ideas. I love this movie for its care for historicity, seen in the script, the production design, and the fabulous costumes, and the wigs. I love how they capture the 19th century frizz. I love this movie for understanding Little Women's place in the literary works of the time. And now that I'm an adult nearing middle age, I love this movie for completely new reasons. Little Women is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story. It is about the transition from childhood vice and selfishness to mature womanhood. And the truth about growing up is that it usually isn't an easy or happy thing. Early in the film, Jo and her sisters share their Christmas wishes, how they hope their lives will pan out. As Amy says, "We'll all grow up one day. We might as well know what we want." But their simple wishes go on a far more complicated journey. Every adaptation has to deal with this sadness, especially in how the tone differs from Part 1 to Part 2. The 2019 version frames the entire story with it, flashing back from the gray, empty world of Part 2 to the golden, laughing days of Part 1. What that film does with structure and color, this film does with the magical score of Thomas Newman. Newman is particularly skilled at portraying complicated emotions in his scores. He captures tragic victory in The Shawshank Redemption, poignant fatalism in The Road to Perdition, humanizing satire in American Beauty. His orchestrations involve what I can only call thick chords, where lots of instruments follow the same rhythm in different registers, almost as if it was a four-handed piano duet. This creates a really luscious feel with loads of atmosphere. But here, he crafts a melody, a remarkable, versatile line that, depending on the speed, instrumentation, and rhythm, captures heartbreak, triumph, and the warmth of home. In the opening credits, he pulls this off twice, beginning with an oboe solo over soft tremolo strings, a heartbreaking, plaintive melody, before transitioning to a lush, warm string rendition, sprinkled with a trumpet and horn countermelody that evokes mid-19th century composing. And it is this duality that rivets me every time I watch this film. Being an adult is a hard-won reality. Growing up hurts. You have to lose things. Yes, your childhood selfishness and pride, but also your easy joy and sense of the world. Your relationships with your family will change. Your friendships will change. Your pursuits of your ambitions will not be easy. You may have to lay your dreams aside as priorities shift, and you will know loss. Growing up is a kind of grief, and yet, oh, the warmth of that childhood, oh, the joy of remembrance, and now, how many good things there are in that change, in spite of that grief, or maybe because of it. This Little Women embraces those realities fully. It isn't afraid to make emotional beats breathe, to let us sit in sadness and heartbreak or anxiety. There's a lot of story to pack into a Little Women movie, and if you watch the other film adaptations, of which I have seen the three most prominent, they do tend to rush the grief into the triumph, into the conclusion. But this adaptation, this 1994 film, lets us be sad. so that when the conclusion comes with a peal of Thomas Newman's triumphant trumpet descant and horn counterpoint, I can't help but smile with a shaky breath and a tear-stained face. And that's why I love this film. Thanks for coming.